Everyone always said that marrying Sebastian Ward was a massive step up for a girl like me. They said it so often that, eventually, I started believing them. So, I kept Sebastian at a polite, respectful distance. I never asked where he was going, and I never spent a single dime of his money. We split our daily living expenses straight down the middle, calculated right to the last cent. Then Sebastian died. To my absolute shock, he left his entire estate to me, turning me into a very wealthy widow. But a widow gets lonely. After a year of grieving, I couldn't help but slip into a secret relationship, hidden from Sebastian's high society friends and family. The new guy was perfect. He was attentive and incredibly sweet, constantly sending me money and gifts while never demanding any kind of official label. I thought this peaceful arrangement would last forever. Until last night, when I walked into a quiet bar and saw my dead husband sitting in a booth, very much alive. Sebastian was nursing a drink, complaining to his best friend. What am I supposed to do? I think my wife is actually falling for another guy. His friend rolled his eyes. Bro, both of those guys are you. You're the one who came up with this twisted scheme. Deal with it. That was the exact moment I realized my perfect online boyfriend was actually my dead husband. I had always suffered from a severe lack of self-worth. When people tell you you're not good enough your entire life, it eventually becomes your inner monologue. Sebastian and I had met through a completely normal matchmaking service. Yet, his wealthy social circle treated me like a gold-digging social climber who had hit the jackpot. They whispered that a plain, middle-class girl like me would be kicked to the curb the moment he grew bored. I was terrified of that happening. To protect my dignity, I insisted on a strict 50-50 split on everything after we got married. I couldn't afford my half of his massive estate, so I made him move into a tiny apartment with me. I spent years scraping together every penny just to pay my half of the down payment. Sebastian had tried to stop me countless times. Sasha, you don't have to do this, he would plead, running a hand through his hair. What's mine is yours. Let me take care of you. I would only sigh. Men always say that when they are in love. But if things soured, he could easily turn into one of those nightmare exes you read about online, demanding his money back down to the cost of a cheap takeout dinner. I wasn't going to let myself be humiliated. In the end, Sebastian couldn't change my mind. He resigned himself to my strict financial boundaries. We split the utilities, the groceries, even the cost of toilet paper. If he bought me a gift, I made sure to buy him something of equal value. Eventually, he grew so frustrated with my stubbornness that he made a rule, fine. But whatever the husband wears, the wife has to buy. And whatever the wife wears, the husband has to buy. It's for marital unity. You have to listen to me on this one. I thought it made some sense, so I agreed. But the execution was disastrous. Because he was incredibly wealthy, he showered me with designer clothes and fine jewelry. Meanwhile, because my salary was modest, I could only afford cheap clothes for him. A billionaire heir was walking around in faded, worn-out shirts, and he refused to replace his underwear even when they had holes in them. I was constantly broke from trying to pay off my half of our mortgage. I couldn't afford the $1,000 designer silk boxers he was used to. Instead, I bought him a 3-pack of cotton briefs from a supermarket discount bin. Every time I handed them over, he would smile warmly and say, "It's fine, sweetheart. When you get that big promotion, you can buy me the fancy ones." A mix of guilt and affection would swell in my chest. Looking at his gentle, patient nature, I had to admit the gossips were right. I really had married up. His kindness motivated me to work myself to the bone. By the end of the year, my hard work paid off. I landed a major promotion and my salary tripled. Feeling rich for the first time in my life, I immediately went to a high-end boutique and splurged on a pair of $1,000 designer boxers. I wanted his pampered backside to finally get the luxury it deserved. But as I walked up the stairs to our apartment, a chorus of loud, agonizing wails echoed down the corridor. My heart sank as I realized the sound was coming from our door. The front door was wide open. Inside, white funeral flowers and ritual paper money were scattered across the floor. My in-laws were collapsed on the rug, weeping hysterically. The moment my mother-in-law saw me, she grabbed my hands, her voice cracking with grief. "Sasha, oh my God. Sebastian was in a horrific car crash. He's gone." My mind went completely blank. The expensive shopping bag slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor in slow motion. Sebastian's funeral was a blur. Before I could even begin to process my grief, my in-laws dragged me to a lawyer's office to sign some paperwork. My mother-in-law wiped her swollen eyes. "Sasha, Sebastian left a will. He signed over his entire fortune, his estates, his investments, everything to you. Please, sign the papers." I stared at her, tears suddenly streaming down my cheeks even though my mind felt numb and detached. And just like that, I became an incredibly wealthy widow. Life moved on in a quiet, empty routine. The apartment felt massive with only one person in it. I only had to buy groceries for one, never having to worry about what anyone else wanted for dinner. But suddenly, my phone was blowing up with new friend requests. People I barely knew were suddenly eager to introduce me to eligible bachelors. Even though I was technically still grieving the Ward family's heir, my new massive net worth made me the most desirable bachelorette in the city. When I hesitantly mentioned the matchmakers to my in-laws, they only smiled gently. Sasha, life goes on, his father said, patting my hand. Sebastian is gone, but you are still young. If you find someone who treats you well, you should take the chance. We will always consider you our daughter. I was stunned by their generosity. Sebastian was their only son, yet they were actively encouraging me to move on. I felt incredibly lucky to have them. I lowered my head, so lost in my thoughts that I missed the fleeting, awkward glances exchanged between my mother-in-law and father-in-law. Determined to honor their kindness, I resolved never to officially remarry. But as the months dragged on, the loneliness became a heavy, physical ache. I decided I would allow myself a quiet, secret relationship. If nobody found out, I could still be the faithful widow to the public, while keeping myself from going mad with isolation. After filtering through dozens of profiles, I finally selected one guy. The sheer volume of men pursuing me was overwhelming, and I knew deep down they were only interested in my inheritance. But this one seemed different. The moment we connected on the app, he sent 3 messages. Hi, I'm Ashton. You don't need to feel pressured. It's completely fine if you don't like me. I don't need a public label or any commitments. You can walk away whenever you want. Reading those words, my heart skipped a beat. He was offering the exact arrangement I needed without me even having to ask. I quickly typed out my reply, are you sure? I'm not as perfect as you think. I'm a widow, and my loyalty lies with my late husband's parents. They've been wonderful to me, and I can't leave them behind. His reply came instantly, I understand. But to me, you are the absolute best. My chest tightened with warmth. Nobody had ever called me the best before. We started texting every day. Ashton was a master of emotional validation. If I told him I had managed to drink a full glass of water, he would find a way to make it sound like a heroic achievement. His constant, lavish praise made my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I constantly tried to downplay his compliments, stop teasing me, I'm really not that special. But he refused to back down, Sasha, I mean every word. You are the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever met. I began to worry. Was Ashton a romance scammer? The only people who had ever flattered me this intensely were sales associates working on commission. It reminded me of the time I went to get a haircut, and the stylist insisted I would look like a runway model with rainbow hair. He used rainbow literally, dyeing my hair 7 different colors. Being too polite to say no, I let them work their magic. The bill was a staggering $5,000. Sebastian had paid it without a single complaint. It's normal for a husband to pay for his wife's hair, he'd smiled. You can cover my next haircut to make it even. I had kept that ridiculous 7-colored hair for less than 30 minutes before running to a different salon across the street to dye it back to dark brown. To test Ashton's intentions, I sent him a transfer of $300. Within a second, he rejected it. Before I could type a question mark, my phone began to buzz with notification after notification of cash transfers from him. I counted 20 transfers of $500 each. He texted, buy yourself some flowers, Sasha. I don't want your money. My jaw dropped. How had I managed to find a man who genuinely wanted nothing to do with my fortune? I continued our relationship with a mix of excitement and absolute terror. Exquisite, ridiculously expensive gifts began arriving at my doorstep almost daily. I felt a deep sense of guilt. Carrying on a secret relationship was already bad enough, but accepting these diamond necklaces and designer bags made me feel like a thief. When I tried to return them, he simply texted, Sasha, these jewels were made for a beautiful woman. They have no value if they aren't draped over your skin. My fingers trembled as I read his words, my heart hammering against my ribs. For the first time in my life, I was experiencing the dizzying thrill of romance. But a quiet, ugly voice inside me kept whispering that I didn't deserve it. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. I wasn't beautiful. I had a faint, reddish birthmark the size of a coin right near my temple. If you looked closely, it was impossible to miss. My biological parents had always claimed that birthmark was a curse, a financial black hole that kept our family in poverty. They blamed every misfortune on me. On Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I was surprised to find my in-laws standing on the porch, holding a beautifully decorated cake. Mom, Dad. What are you doing here? You should have called first. My mother-in-law took my hands in hers. Sasha, sweetheart, it's your 26th birthday. Did you forget? Staring at my name iced onto the cake, my throat tightened. It was the first time anyone had ever celebrated my birthday. His father smiled warmly. Sasha, you were only married to our son for a year before he was taken from us. It's not fair to keep you tied to a ghost. If you meet someone good, you have our blessing to marry. We want you to be happy. Tears spilled over my eyelashes. I felt a crushing weight of guilt. Their son had been dead for barely a year, and I was already carrying on with another man. I felt like an absolute monster. My mother-in-law gently wiped my cheeks. Oh, sweetheart, don't cry. We mean it. You are gorgeous, hardworking, and kind. Any man would be lucky to have you. I kept my mouth shut, too terrified to admit that I was already seeing someone. After my in-laws left, Ashton called. His deep voice filtered through the speaker. Hey, beautiful. Did you miss me today? Anxiety gripped my chest. Ashton, I think we're moving too fast. My husband hasn't even been gone that long. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then he said softly, Sasha, you can't let a ghost hold you back. You deserve to live your life. He's gone, and the past is in the past. Let me take care of you now. But I don't deserve this, I whispered, my voice cracking. Everyone always said I was beneath Sebastian. They said I was lucky he even looked at me. Sasha, Sebastian married you because he adored you. I bet he thought he was the lucky one. You deserve everything this world has to offer, especially the love and gifts of someone who cares about you. Drawing lines and rejecting gifts only hurts the person trying to give them to you. His words hit me like a physical blow. I suddenly remembered Sebastian's face when I had insisted on splitting our bills 50-50. Had I hurt him back then? Okay, I whispered. I understand. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet apartment, my mind spinning. The doorbell rang again, interrupting my thoughts. On the porch sat a massive bouquet of crimson roses with a small card, Happy birthday, Sasha. Love, Ashton. I stared at the velvety petals, that familiar, suffocating feeling of unworthiness creeping back in. But then Ashton's words echoed in my head, rejecting gifts only hurts the person trying to give them to you. I picked up the heavy vase, carried it inside, and shot him a text, thank you. They are absolutely beautiful. From that day on, I forced myself to stop saying no. Every time a package arrived from Ashton, I accepted it gracefully, sending him sweet messages of gratitude. By our third month together, my spare bedroom was overflowing with designer clothes, jewelry boxes, and expensive silk scarves. One evening, as I walked past Sebastian's portrait in the hallway, I stopped and gently touched the glass covering his smiling face. I'm sorry, Sebastian, I whispered. But I think I've fallen in love with him. I want to try being happy. My heart couldn't lie to me anymore. I was genuinely happy when I talked to Ashton. I closed my eyes, making a decision. I had spent our entire marriage pushing Sebastian away out of fear. I wasn't going to make the same mistake with Ashton. I opened my phone and sent him a message, let's meet tomorrow. A few agonizing minutes passed before his reply arrived, okay. My chest tightened with nervous excitement. Meeting in person would change everything, he would become a real, permanent part of my life. I spun around in the empty living room, immediately rushing to my closet to try on outfits. Later that night, my friend Violet texted me, begging me to join her at a popular downtown lounge. I was about to type an excuse when she sent another message, don't you dare say no. You need to get out of that apartment. You can't spend the rest of your youth mourning Sebastian. It's time to meet some new guys. I sighed, smiling slightly. I actually wanted to find a quiet moment to tell her about Ashton. I put on a simple black dress and left the apartment, deciding to enjoy one last night of freedom before starting my new chapter tomorrow. The lounge was packed and deafeningly loud. I quickly navigated through the crowd and headed toward the second-floor VIP booths, where it was significantly quieter. As I pulled out my phone to check Violet's room number, a familiar voice drifted from a semi-private alcove just around the corner. Seriously, dude, what is your deal? You're driving me insane. You've been moping around like a rejected lover for months. It was Marcus, Sebastian's childhood best friend. I instinctively stepped back against the wall, wanting to avoid an awkward conversation. But then, another voice answered him. Marcus, what am I supposed to do? I think my wife is actually falling for another guy. My heart stopped. My fingers went entirely numb, and my phone nearly slipped from my grasp. I knew that voice. I would know it anywhere, even in a crowded, noisy bar. I slowly peeked around the corner, my eyes widening in sheer disbelief. There, sitting in the dim light of the booth, was Sebastian. He was alive. The world didn't tilt, it simply emptied of air. I stood frozen against the cold, polished mahogany wall of the VIP corridor, my fingers gripping my phone so tightly the edges dug painfully into my palm. The bass from the lounge below vibrated through the floorboards, a relentless, mocking heartbeat that contrasted violently with the sudden, icy stillness in my chest. Bro, both of those guys are you. You're the one who came up with this twisted scheme. Deal with it. Marcus's voice, laced with dry exhaustion, echoed in my ears over and over. And then, the sigh that followed. It was a heavy, familiar sound. A sound I had heard 1,000 times in our tiny, cramped apartment when I refused to let him pay for takeout, or when I stayed up until 3 in the morning calculating our utility bills to the exact decimal point. It was Sebastian. I peeked around the corner. The dim amber lighting of the booth cast long shadows across his face. He looked tired. His hair, usually styled back for high society galas, was messy, as if he had been running his hands through it all night. He was wearing a faded, slightly worn-out gray t-shirt. My chest construct collapsed. That shirt. It was one of the cheap supermarket brand shirts I had bought him because I couldn't afford anything better. He had kept it. He was wearing it right now, nursing a glass of scotch. complaining to his best friend about me falling in love with him. I didn't think she'd actually move on so fast, Sebastian muttered, his voice cracking slightly. I mean, I wanted her to open her heart. I wanted her to realize she deserves to be showered with gifts, to be loved without keeping a ledger. But now she's telling Ashton she loves him. Marcus, she never told me she loved me like that. Not once. Because you were Sebastian, the billionaire heir she thought was going to dump her the second he got bored, Marcus replied, taking a sip of his own drink. As Ashton, you're just some faceless guy who doesn't pressure her. You set up a perfect simulation, man. You faked your own death. Do you have any idea how insane that is? If Sasha ever finds out. She won't, Sebastian interrupted, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. The plan was always to miraculously reappear. To tell her there was a mistake, or that I was in a coma, or I don't know. I just wanted her to learn how to accept things from me. I wanted to break down that wall she built around herself. I couldn't listen to another word. My knees felt like water. I stepped back, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor, a sound swallowed by the roaring music from below. I turned and stumbled, down the stairs, pushing past the laughing, drinking crowds of the lounge. Sasha. Hey, Sasha. I heard Violet's voice calling out to me from a table near the bar, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I burst through the heavy glass doors of the lounge and into the cool, damp night air. I began to run. I ran until my lungs burned and the strap of my cheap heel snapped, forcing me to stop under the harsh, buzzing glow of a street lamp. I leaned against a cold brick wall, panting, as the sheer, monstrous scope of the deception began to unravel in my mind. Sebastian wasn't dead. He hadn't died in a horrific car crash. There was no mangled metal, no tragic loss of life. The white funeral flowers scattered across our apartment floor. My mother-in-law collapsing on the rug, weeping hysterically. The lawyer's office. The will. The signing over of his entire fortune. It was all a play. A massive, coordinated theatrical production staged by the entire Ward family. A sob tore from my throat, dry and agonizing. They had all been in on it. His parents, whom I had grown to love like my own, who had brought a birthday cake to my door and told me I was gorgeous, hardworking, and kind. They weren't being generous, they were playing their parts. They were facilitating a psychological experiment designed by their son to break down my stubbornness. I pulled out my phone. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped it. I opened the messaging app. There was the contact, Ashton. Sasha, these jewels were made for a beautiful woman. They have no value if they aren't draped over your skin. You are the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever met. I don't want your money. It was Sebastian. The man who had slept beside me, who had listened to my fears. Who knew my deepest, darkest insecurities. He knew how my biological parents had treated me like a financial burden. He knew how his friends' whispers had gutted my self-esteem. And his solution to my trauma was to gaslight me on a global scale. He had forced me to mourn him. He had watched me weep over his portrait. He had let me carry the crushing guilt of cheating on a dead man while he sat behind a keyboard, typing sweet nothings as Ashton and basking in the satisfaction of finally breaking my defenses. You monster, I whispered to the empty street. You absolute monster. The warmth I had felt for Ashton curdled instantly into a bitter, burning poison. The beautiful crimson roses waiting for me at home suddenly felt like blood splattered across my living room. The designer clothes filling my spare bedroom weren't gifts of love, they were trophies of my defeat. I stood there for a long time, the cold wind biting through my thin black dress. I had spent my entire life believing I wasn't good enough. I had spent our marriage trying to protect my dignity because I was terrified of being humiliated. And in the end, the man I loved had humiliated me in the most elaborate, cruel way possible. But as the initial shock began to recede, a cold, hard clarity took its place. The fragile, insecure girl who had run herself ragged trying to pay 50-50 on a billionaire's estate died in that VIP corridor. If Sebastian wanted to play a game, I was going to make sure he played it to the very end. I didn't go back to the apartment we had shared. Instead, I booked a room at a small, unassuming boutique hotel on the other side of the city, paying with my own credit card, the one linked to the salary from my new promotion. My own money. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. At 11:30 p.m., a message arrived from Ashton. Ashton, are you asleep, beautiful? I was just thinking about our meeting tomorrow. I can't wait to finally see you. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I could see him in my mind's eye, sitting in his luxury penthouse or maybe still in that bar booth, typing those words with a smug, self-satisfied smile. Thinking he had finally won me. I took a deep breath, forcing my fingers to remain steady as I typed. Sasha, I can't sleep either. I'm just so excited. And a little nervous. Ashton, don't be nervous. I'm yours, Sasha. Completely. Tomorrow is the start of our new life. Sasha, yes. Our new life. Let's meet at the pavilion at 1 p.m. It's quiet. There. Ashton, the pavilion? The high-end French place downtown? Perfect. I'll book a private room. Sasha, no, don't. Let's sit in the main dining room. I want to be out in the open. I've spent too long hiding in the dark. There was a pause. The ellipsis appeared, disappeared, and then appeared again. Ashton, if that's what you want, sweetheart. Anything for you. See you tomorrow. At 1 o'clock. I closed the app and stared at the ceiling. How had he planned to execute this? I wondered. Was he going to show up? Disguised? No, Marcus said he wanted to miraculously reappear. He probably planned to have Ashton stand me up, and then Sebastian would coincidentally walk into the restaurant, alive and well, pretending he had survived his crash. And spent the last year searching for me. He would see me, console me over Ashton's abandonment, and then take me back into his wealthy embrace, now that my stubborn pride had been broken by Ashton's gifts. It was a perfect, cinematic script. He was the hero of his own romance novel. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't feel tired. A strange, clinical coldness had settled over me. I ordered a ride to the Ward estate, the massive, gated mansion where Sebastian's parents lived. I hadn't been there much during our marriage because the sheer opulence of the place made me feel suffocated, but I had visited several times. After Sebastian's death, seeking comfort from the people I thought were my fellow mourners. When the wrought iron gates opened, I felt a shudder of revulsion. I walked up the stone steps and rang the bell. The butler, who had always looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain, opened the door. His eyes widened slightly when he saw me, but he quickly masked it. Good morning, Mrs. Ward. Master Richard and Madame Eleanor are in the sunroom. Thank you, Thomas, I said, my voice steady. I walked through the vaulted hallways, my heels echoing against the marble floors. When I reached the glass-walled sunroom, I saw Eleanor Ward sipping tea, while Richard read the morning paper. They looked peaceful. Content. There was no trace of the devastating grief that had supposedly shattered their lives a year ago. Sasha, darling. Eleanor gasped, putting her teacup down and rushing over to wrap me in a warm embrace. She smelled of expensive lavender and silk. What a wonderful surprise. You should have told us you were coming. We would have had the chef prepare breakfast. I can't stay long, Eleanor, I said, stepping out of her embrace a fraction of a second earlier than usual. Richard looked up from his paper, his eyes warm. Is everything all right, Sasha? You look a bit pale. Are you sleeping well? I'm sleeping fine, I said, walking over to the glass table and placing a heavy, manila envelope onto the glass. It landed with a sharp thud. Eleanor frowned, looking at the envelope. What is this, dear? Those are the transfer documents for Sebastian's estate, I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. The houses, the investment portfolios, the trust funds. I have signed them all back over to the Ward family. Every single penny. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Richard slowly lowered his newspaper. Eleanor's hand hovered over her teacup. Frozen. Sasha, what are you talking about? Eleanor laughed nervously, a high, strained sound. That's Sebastian's legacy to you. He wanted you to have it. We wanted you to have it. I don't want it, I said. And I think we both know that legacy was never real. To begin with. Richard's eyes narrowed, a flicker of panic passing through his eyes before he quickly masked it with a stern, paternal frown. Sasha, if you are feeling overwhelmed by the management of the estate, we can hire a firm to handle it for you. There is no need to make rash decisions. Richard, stop, I interrupted, looking him dead in the eye. I know. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Eleanor's face drained of color. She looked at her husband, her lips parting in a silent gasp. Richard's stern expression cracked, revealing the raw, guilty panic underneath. I know Sebastian is alive, I continued, my voice terrifyingly calm. I know about Ashton. I know about the car crash. I know about the fake funeral. I No, you both stood in my living room, weeping over a lie, and watched me break into pieces so your son could play his twisted psychological game. Sasha. Eleanor took a step toward me, her hands trembling. Sasha, please. Let us explain. Sebastian. He was desperate. You wouldn't let him love you. You were constantly pushing him away, starving yourself to pay for things we could buy with pocket change. He was losing you, darling. He did it out of love. Out of love? A sharp, humorless laugh escaped my lips. He let me grieve his death for a year. He watched me look at his portrait and apologize for not being a better wife. He let me carry the guilt of falling in love with another man while his body was supposedly rotting in a grave. And you, I looked at Eleanor, then at Richard. You encouraged me to move on. You brought me a birthday cake and smiled to my face, knowing your son was sitting in some luxury apartment, reading my private messages and laughing at how easily I was falling for his Ashton persona. We only wanted him to be happy, Sasha, Richard said, his voice dropping its authoritative tone, sounding suddenly very old and very defeated. He was miserable. He thought if he stripped away his identity, if he took away the wealth and the social pressure, you would finally see him. He didn't strip away his wealth, I spat, the anger finally breaking through my frozen exterior. As Ashton, he sent me $20,000 in a single night. He showered me with diamond necklaces and designer clothes. He didn't want to take away the wealth, he wanted to force me to accept it. He wanted to break my pride because my pride was inconvenient for him. I took a step back, looking at them with a mixture of pity and disgust. You are his parents. You should have stopped him. Instead, you helped him commit a felony-level deception. I should call the police. Eleanor let out a choked sob. Sasha, please. But I won't, I said, my voice turning cold again. Because I don't want anything to do with your family ever again. The paperwork is signed. The money is back in your accounts. Tell your son I'll see him at 1 p.m. at the pavilion. I turned on my heel and walked out of the sunroom, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their elaborate lie. By 12:45 p.m., I was sitting at a corner table in the main dining room of the pavilion. The restaurant was a masterpiece of classic French luxury, all white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and soft, muted conversations. I had worn the simple black dress I had bought with my own money, the one I had worn to the lounge the night before. I wore no jewelry. No makeup, save for a light touch of lipstick. I looked at my reflection in the polished silver spoon on the table. My birthmark, the faint, reddish coin near my temple, was clearly visible. I hadn't covered it with concealer today. For the first time in years, I didn't care. At 12:55 p.m., my phone buzzed. Ashton, I'm walking in now. I'm wearing a dark blue suit. Look for me. I didn't reply. I kept my eyes on the entrance of the restaurant. The glass doors opened, and a man walked in. He was wearing a beautifully tailored dark blue suit. His hair was perfectly styled, his jawline clean-shaved. He looked every bit the billionaire heir he was. He's scanning the room, his eyes bright with a mixture of nervous excitement and anticipation. It was Sebastian. He didn't look like a man who had been in a horrific car crash. He looked healthy, vibrant, and completely whole. As his eyes swept the room, they finally landed on me. He froze. I could see the immediate calculation running through his mind. He hadn't expected me to be looking for him. He had probably planned to walk in, spot me, and then pretend it was a miraculous coincidence. But I didn't look surprised. I didn't gasp. I simply sat there, staring at him with a flat, unwavering gaze. Realizing he couldn't play that coincidence card if I was already staring at him, he took a deep breath, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward my table. Every step he took seemed to carry the weight of a man walking onto a stage. Sasha, he said, his voice a perfect mix of shock and emotion. Sasha, oh my God. Is that really you? He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, whether from genuine nerves or acting, I couldn't tell. They told me you were here. I couldn't believe it. I've been looking for you. I woke up from the coma 3 months ago, and my parents. Sit down, Sebastian, I said. My voice was quiet, but it had the cutting edge of a razor. He stopped mid-sentence, his hand hovering in the air. The bright, emotional light in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden, sharp confusion. Sasha? What's wrong? Aren't you happy to see me? I'm alive. I said, sit down. He slowly lowered his hand and pulled out the chair opposite me, his movements suddenly stiff and awkward. He sat, his eyes searching my face, trying to read the blank canvas of my expression. "How is Ashton?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. The silence that followed was deafening. The blood drained from Sebastian's face so fast it looked as if he had been struck. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His hands, resting on the white tablecloth, began to shake. I don't know who you're talking about," he stammered, his voice thin and hollow. "Don't lie to me anymore, Sebastian," I said, my voice remaining terrifyingly level. "It's embarrassing. I was at the lounge last night. I stood outside your booth. I heard you complaining to Marcus about how your wife was falling for another guy." Sebastian stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute, paralyzing horror. The polished, confident billionaire heir vanished in an instant, leaving behind a terrified boy who had just been caught in a monstrous lie. "Sasha," he whispered, his voice cracking. I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, tilting my head. "Can you explain why you let me grieve your death for a year? Can you explain why you let me cry myself to sleep in an empty apartment, begging for you to come back? Can you explain why you made your parents lie to my face, letting me carry the guilt of cheating on you with a stranger you created? I did it for us," he burst out, his voice rising, drawing a few curious glances from nearby tables. He quickly lowered his voice, leaning across the table, his eyes desperate. "Sasha, you were slipping away from me. Our entire marriage was a battle. You wouldn't let me buy you a cup of coffee without transferring me $3. You made us live in a tiny, cramped apartment because your pride wouldn't let you live in my house. I was suffocating. I wanted to show you that it's okay to accept things. I wanted to show you that you deserve to be taken care of. So you decided the best way to teach me that lesson was to psychologically torture me? It wasn't torture. It was." I slammed my hand onto the table, the sharp crack causing him to flinch. "I cried for you every single day, Sebastian. I worked myself to the bone to get a promotion so I could buy you a nice pair of boxers, because I felt so guilty that you were walking around in cheap clothes because of my pride. I walked up those stairs with a $1,000 boutique bag, excited to finally give you something you deserved, only to find your mother screaming that you were dead." Tears finally welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I blinked them back, staring at him with cold fury. "You took my grief and turned it into a game. You sat behind a screen, playing Ashton, watching me slowly lose my mind with loneliness, and used that loneliness to force your gifts down my throat. You made me feel like a monster for moving on, all while you were congratulating yourself on your brilliant scheme. Sasha, please." Sebastian's eyes were wet now, tears spilling over his lashes. He reached across the table to grab my hands, but I pulled them back out of his reach. "I love you. I swear to God, I love you. I didn't know it would hurt you this much. I thought when I finally revealed myself, you'd be so happy I was alive that you'd forgive me. Then you don't know me at all," I said. I pulled the key to our tiny apartment out of my purse and placed it on the table. Beside it, I placed my wedding ring, the simple, cheap silver band I had insisted on because I couldn't afford the diamond one he wanted to buy. "I went to your parents' house this morning. I signed over the entire estate. I don't want a single dime of your money. I don't want your houses. I don't want your gifts. Sasha, no. Please, don't do this," he begged, his voice breaking into a sob. "Keep the money. Keep the apartment. Just don't leave me." "The girl who would have stayed is dead, Sebastian," I said, standing up. "You killed her a year ago." I turned and walked away. Sasha, wait." I heard his chair scrape against the floor, heard him call my name, but I didn't look back. I walked out of the restaurant, into the bright, blinding sunlight, and didn't stop walking until the noise of his cries was entirely swallowed by the city. The next few weeks were a blur of cold, exhausting reality. I packed my few belongings from the tiny apartment we had shared, only the things I had bought with my own money. I left every single designer dress, every silk scarf, and every jewelry box Ashton had sent me sitting on the living room floor. I left them in neat, organized piles, like a museum exhibit of a life that had never been real. I moved into a tiny, drafty studio apartment on the industrial edge of the city. The rent was high, eating up a significant portion of my new salary, but it was mine. Every square inch of it was paid for by my own sweat and labor. I changed my phone number. I blocked Sebastian, his parents, Marcus, and even Violet, who I suspected had known more than she let on. I wanted a complete Absolute break from the world of the Ward family. But cutting them off was the easy part. The hard part was the silence. In the quiet of my new studio, the anger began to fade, leaving behind a vast, hollow ache. I would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for the empty space beside me, my mind momentarily forgetting the betrayal before the cold truth crashed down on me all over again. I started going to therapy. My therapist, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Lowen, didn't offer easy platitudes. She listened to me recount my childhood, how my parents had blamed me for their financial failures, how they had treated my birthmark like a curse, and then she listened to the story of my marriage. "Why did you insist on the 50-50 split, Sasha?" she asked during one of our sessions. "Because I didn't want him to have power over me," I replied, staring at the floor. "In my family, money was weaponized. If you accepted something, it meant you owed them your soul. I thought if I paid my own way, Sebastian could never use his wealth to humiliate me. But by doing that, did you allow him to be your husband?" Dr. Lowen asked gently. "Or did you treat him like a roommate you were constantly trying to outcalculate?" I closed my eyes, a tear slipping down my cheek. I was terrified. I loved him so much, but I was so sure he would grow bored of me. I thought if I kept my distance, it wouldn't hurt as much when he left. And his reaction to that fear, Dr. Lowen continued, was to create a fantasy where he had absolute control. He faked his death to strip away your defense mechanism. Both of you were operating out of deep, destructive fears. But while your fear made you build walls, his fear made him play God. Those words stayed with me. I realized that Sebastian and I had both been deeply broken people who had met through a matchmaking service, hoping to find safety, but instead using our respective traumas to destroy each other. He had wanted to force me into the mold of the pampered wife, to validate his own need to be the savior, while I had shrunk myself into a defensive shell to protect my fragile ego. I threw myself into my work. With my new promotion, I had a team of 5 people under me. I learned how to delegate, how to make decisions, and how to carry myself with authority. I stopped apologizing for taking up space in meetings. I stopped covering my birthmark with heavy foundation. One day, after a particularly successful presentation to our board of directors, my boss pulled me aside. "Great work today, Sasha," she said, offering a warm smile. "You've really come into your own this past year. You have a bright future here." "Thank you," I said. As I walked back to my desk, a strange, unfamiliar feeling bloomed in my chest. It was pride. Genuine, unadulterated pride. I hadn't needed Sebastian's inheritance to become successful. I hadn't needed Ashton's constant, exaggerated praise to feel worthy. I had done this myself. But the past wasn't finished with me yet. 6 months after the confrontation at the pavilion, a package arrived at my office. My receptionist handed it to me with a curious look. It was delivered by a courier, Sasha. No return address. I took the box into my private office and closed the door. My hands trembled slightly as I cut the tape. Inside was a thick stack of handwritten letters, tied together with a simple piece of twine. On top of the stack sat a small velvet jewelry box. I opened the box first. Inside was the 3-pack of cheap, cotton supermarket briefs I had bought Sebastian a year and a half ago. They were washed, neatly folded, and completely worn out. I let out a soft, choked breath. I untied the twine and picked up the first letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Sebastian's, messy, hurried, and passionate. "Sasha. I know you probably won't read these. If you throw them in the trash, I won't blame you. But I need to write them anyway, if only to keep myself from going completely mad. My parents told me what you said to them. They are devastated, and they should be. But please don't hate them. They only did it because they saw how miserable I was. I was the architect of this nightmare. I was the one who convinced them that this was a romantic way to save our marriage. I look at the empty apartment every day. The piles of clothes and jewelry you left on the floor are still there. I haven't touched them. I haven't touched the keys or the ring you left on the table. I see now how monstrous my plan was. I thought I was being clever. I thought I was breaking down your walls, but I didn't realize I was crushing your spirit under the weight of a year of grief. I watched you mourn me, Sasha. I saw the tears you shed through the security cameras I kept active in our apartment. I told myself it was necessary, that the payoff would be worth it. How could I have been so blind? How could I have mistaken my own selfishness for love? I am starting therapy. I want to understand why I felt the need to control you like that. I want to understand why I couldn't just respect your boundaries. Even if they hurt my pride. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to ever come back. But I want you to know that I am so sorry. Yours, always, Sebastian. I sat at my desk, the letter trembling in my hand. I read through the rest of the letters. They spanned the last 6 months, detail by detail. He wrote about his therapy sessions, about his realization of how his family's wealth had given him a god complex, making him believe he could script other people's lives like a movie. He wrote about his decision to step down from the active management of the Ward family empire, choosing instead to focus on a small, non-profit foundation that helped underprivileged families secure housing, a project he knew I would have cared about. There were no pleas for me to meet him. No grand gestures of buying out my company or sending diamonds to my office. He was just talking to me. I put the letters back in the box and placed them in my bottom desk drawer. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready. But for the first time in 6 months, the cold, hard knot of anger in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a quiet, melancholy understanding. We had both been broken. We had both hurt each other. The question was, could two broken people ever build something whole? Another year passed. I received a promotion to vice president of my division. I moved out of the drafty studio and into a beautiful, sun-drenched apartment in a quiet, historic neighborhood. It had a small balcony where I grew tomatoes and basil, and a large bookshelf filled with novels I actually had time to read. I had built a life. A real, solid life that belonged to nobody but me. One Saturday afternoon, I was walking through the local farmer's market, carrying a tote bag filled with fresh produce and flowers. The air was crisp. With the arrival of autumn, the golden leaves drifting down onto the cobblestone streets. I stopped at a honey stall, debating between wildflower and clover. The wildflower is incredible, a voice said beside me. It has a slight lavender note. My heart did a slow, heavy flip. I turned my head. Sebastian was standing there. He looked different. He had lost some weight, and his face had a mature, weathered look to it. He was wearing a simple, dark green flannel shirt and jeans, no designer label in sight. His hair was slightly long, curling at his collar. He looked less like a billionaire heir and more like a normal man, enjoying a Saturday afternoon. He didn't look shocked to see me. He had a soft, tentative smile on his face. His eyes warm and completely devoid of the frantic desperation I had seen at the pavilion. Sasha, he said softly. Hi. Hi, Sebastian, I replied, my voice steady. You look beautiful, he said. He looked at my temple, where my birthmark was clearly visible under the autumn sun. His smile widened slightly. You really do. Thank you, I said. How have you been? I've been good, he said, hands shoved into his pockets. I'm working with the foundation full-time now. We just finished building our first community center in the East District. I think you'd like it. I read about it in the papers, I admitted. It looks like a wonderful project. Congratulations. Thank you. He hesitated, his eyes searching my face with a quiet, respectful distance. I wanted to thank you for not throwing away the letters. I knew you received them because the courier confirmed it. Writing them was the only thing that kept me grounded. They were well written, I said, a slight, genuine smile touching my lips. And the cheap underwear was a nice touch. A soft, self-deprecating laugh escaped his lips. I still have them. They're a reminder of who I want to be. Not the guy who plays God, but the guy who is grateful for a 3-pack of supermarket cotton. We stood there in the middle of the bustling market, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. There was no dramatic music, no grand declarations of love, no tears. Just two people who had survived a storm of their own making. Sasha, he said, his voice dropping to a quiet, earnest register. I've spent the last year and a half learning how to respect boundaries. I promise you, I will never try to push past yours again. But, if you are willing, I would really love to take you out for a cup of coffee. And I promise, we can split the bill straight down the middle. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the growth in his eyes, the genuine humility that had replaced his old, wealthy assurance. And then I looked at myself. I was no longer the fragile, terrified girl who was constantly trying to prove her worth. I knew my worth. It didn't depend on his money, and it didn't depend on his absence. I smiled, a warm, genuine feeling spreading through my chest. Coffee sounds nice, Sebastian, I said. But we are not splitting it down the middle. He blinked, a sudden look of worry passing through his eyes. No. No, I said, my smile widening. Since I'm a vice president now, and I make very good money, I'm buying. Sebastian stared at me for a second, and then a brilliant, beautiful laugh broke from his throat, the happiest sound I had ever heard from him. I would be honored, Sasha, he said, offering his arm, but stopping a few inches short, leaving the choice entirely up to me. I reached out, my fingers wrapping gently around his sleeve, and together, we walked out of the market and into the golden autumn afternoon.